Well, there's a lot of questions here. Welcome back to America's Forum. We're going to get to it right now. With us here on the set, Ed Berliner, legal analyst Michelle Suskauer, and of course, I'm John Bachman and J.D. Hayworth.
And Michelle, let's begin the questioning for you, Counselor. Does the recall further point to GM liability?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, this is something, although you said 2004, there's actually documentation that they may have known about this as early as 2001. This is just a brand new, federal lawsuit that was filed actually out of San Francisco, where there's a variety of car owners from around the country, very, very big heavy hitters in terms of this federal lawsuit regarding this defective switch. And there have been at least 13 deaths that have been associated with this defective switch. And it's pretty outrageous what has been going on. And it's not just loss of use and loss of value of the car, but it's also the cover-up. And what these attorneys are saying is that they have significant documentation that GM knew about it, that it was a $2 switch, and it was easier to defend against the lawsuits, less expensive to defend against the lawsuits than to actually take out the switch and exchange it for $2.
Now, when we get to and I'm glad you used the word cover-up, because to me that has to stop and start right there. But when you get to that level in a multi-layered company like GM, you now have to go right to the top, or at least find out how far it goes.
That's right.
Now, we have 4 CEOs that are involved in this, coming up to Mary Barra now is the 4th. You have Fritz Hendrickson, who was a GM employee from '84 to 2009. So here's somebody who knows the culture inside and out. You have Edward Wilkinson, or Whitaker rather, who followed him. You have Daniel Akerson, who followed him. So if you're investigating this now from the government standpoint, you've got to go to the top. But do you now look at all of these people as being culpable in this cover-up?
I think you really have to, in order to really do your due diligence. I mean, not only do we have the federal lawsuit, which they're seeking class action status. It hasn't been done yet. But there's also these individual lawsuits from all these deaths and accidents and injuries. But you also have a variety of different investigations going on before Congress, not just civilly, but also criminally as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of heads that are going to roll as a result of it. A result of this. And poor Mary, I mean, she's taken the reins of this company, and she says, look, the buck stops with her. But as you said, there are a lot of individuals who may be culpable here.
Are we talking about criminal, though, when we get to this point?
It could potentially be. But this is something that Congress is investigating. And this is really just the beginning.
Well, it's interesting because Ed talked about the culture of GM and who worked there. You offered the exclamation, poor Mary. Listen, Mary has been a part of GM. She talked about working there, her dad being on the assembly line. If you talk about someone who is inculcated in the culture of GM, it's Mary Barra. Now, in terms of
and leave her poor dad. Her dad just worked on the line.
Well, but if you're talking about culpability, this is very effective to suddenly go on hey, look, here is our charm offensive, here is our disclosure offensive. I'm someone new. Forget my involvement in GM previously. Now I'm going to turn over a new leaf.
And I'm not saying that look, I don't know what her culpability is or is not, and certainly there's going to be a lot of investigation. There's going to be a lot of discovery that's going to go on in a variety of different lawsuit fronts. But again, she is in charge, and the buck stops with her. But she is having to deal with this PR nightmare that seems to just be getting worse and worse. But again, instead of saying, no, we didn't do anything wrong, they're admitting it. It's just, how far does it go back?
With regard to this whole switch, there's one guy who found out. It's an engineer in Pensacola, Florida, who was a guy who was hired by a family whose child was involved in one of these accidents. He took the switch and found what had been changed in the switch. 2 pieces. One was a spring where the compression had been changed, and one was a piece of flashing which allowed for contact inside. If he took it apart, come on, let's stop suspending disbelief here. Somebody in General Motors, in that massive multi-million-dollar global corporation, had to know exactly what they were doing and know the changes they were making and the reasons they made them. And that speaks not only to culpability, but being involved in the cover-up.
And there's no question. I believe that may have been back in 2006, if I'm not mistaken. I know I was reading about that as to when there was a change and why they made the change. And that is exactly right. You hit the nail on that.
And it took this gentleman until 2012 before he actually did the investigation. So it's 6 years after it's done. We always talk about smoking guns. It seems to me as if we have a warehouse of riflery that's now available in this, that the government has everything they need. Plus, it would seem to me that everybody who has a case against General Motors pretty much has everything they need at this point, wouldn't you say?
Well, it sounds
that way.
It sounds like they do. I mean, it sort of harkens back, if you remember, the class action suit against Toyota several years ago, and that was over $1 billion settlement. Now, are we going to see that amount of money on the table in terms of selling this? I don't know. They're saying that it really isn't going to be that high.
That case, there wasn't a lot of proof there like there is for this case.
That's right. But that was I believe that was a sudden acceleration case, which was what Toyota was.
And they could never recreate the problem in an official capacity
That's
either.
right. And they have that here. But again, I'm not sure the numbers are going to be the same. But just in terms of the similarities between having a class action suit against an international corporation.
As a taxpayer, there's a basic question that I want to know here, because of all of us who pay taxes contributed to bailing GM out from the position they were in. What kind of due diligence did the government do? This goes back a long time. There should have been some due diligence there to investigate any potential scenarios like this coming up, right?
Well, but I mean, that's what is going on in terms of the hearings right now before Congress, in terms of the plea for transparency with these corporations, especially these car manufacturers, in terms of any potential defects. And that's what the victims of this unfortunate tragedy is asking for.
One thing in Canada that has now come up, there is a class action lawsuit in Canada which is against General Motors. It is seeking $500 million in general and special damages, $150 million in punitive aggregated damages. So if you're now you're sitting in the United States as an attorney, you're watching this happen in Canada, do you now take this, and is this that damning moment where you go to GM and say, guys, it doesn't make a difference that it's in Canada, it's here. You're going to lose this one.
I don't think it's a question of whether they're going to be successful. I think it's a question of how much it's going to take to settle this multinational case, international case.
Would you say this might go past, if indeed they are found guilty? Would your guess be that the 1.9 that Toyota got hit for, we're looking for a lot more money here?
It could possibly be, but my understanding is that there are also a lot of older cars in terms of the value, because it's again, we're not talking about the wrongful death. What we're talking about is a loss of use and the value of the car. If some of these cars are significantly older, then the value may not be there. So I'm not sure, but we're talking large numbers, big numbers.
To be determined, no doubt, in a court of law. Ed, Michelle, we thank you very much for that input. When we come back, the U.S. and China on the verge of nuclear war. That's the premise of a new blockbuster thriller by best-selling author Ted Bell. John, you get a chance to talk to Ted after the break, and we want to hear you. We're calling out to you, not recalling. We'd love to get your comments via Twitter @NewsmaxTV, #AmericasForum, Facebook.com/Newsmax, or connect at NewsmaxTV.com.
Tonight we are a country awakening.